Luther Burrell has been talking to Sky Sports News after a Rugby Football Union investigation lasting more than 8 months found the former England player's claims of racism in the sport to be true. Burrell reflected on the abuse he suffered in his time at his last club, Newcastle Falcons, and shared his views on how rugby can become more inclusive. Just a warning, you might find issues raised in this interview upsetting.
The word closure has been thrown around, but I mean, how am I going to get closure from this, really? You know, the closure comes when you see some big progression, right? Otherwise, this is all for nothing. So I think there's no expiration date with this. We need to keep banging the drum, and we need to now look at what actionable things we can do. You know, we can talk about representation, we can talk about objectives and targets and timelines of the future, and these are the conversations that I want to be having. So, you know, when you talk about closure, as it's been mentioned to me earlier, I don't really think this is any point of closure for me. It's always tough going back to that space. It's almost like secondary abuse, you know, that's what the professionals may call it, when you're reliving these experiences. But at the point, you don't really appreciate the depth of them. But for me, as I've alluded to, the final straw was, you know, when you're talking about somebody being a slave, you know, I'm supposed to be a teammate to this player, to this character, look after him on the field, you know, go to war with him every weekend, and we have these, what they're categorizing as banter. Calling me a slave, I need sun cream on my wrists and ankles where my shackles were. We're going back hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, did our ancestors not do enough for us to have a voice and not have to put up with this sort of stigma? It's absolutely ridiculous, mate. So, as you can tell, I'm still frustrated by it, you know, but, and this is the sort of stuff what needs to be eradicated, because, look, it's abhorrent, isn't it? It's horrendous. Not just that. I think the things that the club had in place were, to their own admission, not up to standard. So I think that they're going to learn a lot from this experience. They come out and publicly said if the player had gone to HR, it would have been handled differently. There was no HR department, so where was I to go? You know, it's my opportunity to actually hit back at that statement, because, you know, it's one thing that I said initially. There was nowhere for me to go. I was almost alienated as well. So for them to come out and mix their words and articulate it in a manner to show that there were places for me to go, there wasn't. So I'm frustrated by that. I'm still frustrated by them because they haven't really taken accountability. What can I do? That's out of my control. Things have been proven, and I've been backed now to the highest level, from the highest level. So, you know, I'm sure the club will move in the right direction. You know, it took 6.5 months for the owner of the club to come forward and have a meeting with me and sit down and have a chat man to man, and let's discuss what's going on. It's disappointing. Look, we finally got there, but 6.5 months. It's a bit ridiculous, to be honest, but look, I'll hopefully be a part of that club's progression. I hope we'll continue to have these conversations, and look at, you know, ultimately I want the club to progress, because it's a beautiful game, and I think in the North East, rugby needs to be represented up there. So there was a particular incident where someone called me and another player overheard it and actually stepped in and said, you know, that's too far, that, you know, you can't say that. And that was literally it. But it didn't matter that was it. What actually resonated more with me was the fact that one player had actually recognised that that's too far, you can't say that, and actually mentioned it to him and actually called him out. Yeah, it could have gone further. It's the first player of that particular environment that's actually gone, you know what, hold on, you can't say that. And that's what's really stuck with me from my experience of certain situations. Look, I wish there were more. People have often said, I've heard a comment that I could be part of the problem by not mentioning names and doing this, that and the other, or handling my business there and then, but that's absolute nonsense, really, because you know when you feel oppressed, and you have been oppressed for a long time, and there's historical factors that go into play, and you become part of this moulded environment, you know, and people that have said this to me are part of that environment. You know, I see black people, people from diverse backgrounds now in the industry that are moulded into it, and they're not going to speak up because they're part of the infrastructure now, and they're looking after themselves, you know, which is disappointing. And when I talk about, you know, our history as black people, you know, did our ancestors not do enough for us to actually stand up and have a voice and be accounted for, and actually have respect from your peers? You know, it shouldn't be an issue in 2023. So, you know, there's something wrong. And I'm really happy that the RFU have actually published what they have published, and they've taken such accountability, because I can only see this be a positive thing moving forward. So, look, we'll wait to hear what their plans are moving forward. But, you know, I just want to give them a shout out, because credit where credit's due. You know, this could have been brushed under the carpet. It hasn't. They've done internal investigations, and they've admitted that there is fault at all levels of the game. I think punishment needs to be in place. There needs to be some sort of punishment if this carries on and occurs. I'm not sure how that would look. Representation, as I alluded to, but it doesn't come from my perspective of starting to name these players and putting them in the spotlight. It starts at the top of the club, so the owners, CEOs, down to your director of rugby, your head coach. They're the drivers of the culture of that club. So you start with them, and that filters down into your senior team, your academy team, and the junior academy coming through. And you'll see progression. But look, it's not going to happen overnight, is it? We know that. So look, a starting point, yeah, could be educational. And then you've got to look at representation. You've got to look at jumping into different communities, getting involved with the culture of them communities. There's a number of things that they can do. So look, I think they're planning on keeping me up to speed with what their outlook is. So I'll have my input where I can. We'll see how we can progress the club moving forward.
Luther Burrell. Sky Sports News contacted Newcastle Falcons today regarding his comments that the owner didn't reach out to him until 6 months later. The club didn't wish to comment.